Hey, welcome to Audio Listeners. We're all about breaking down the best ideas from great books.
Want to learn from all those amazing books out there, but you just can't find the time?
That's exactly what we do. We pull the key ideas from the best books on growth and motivation.
So you can boost your personal growth, gain powerful knowledge, and find that daily motivation for free.
Here's the cool part. Every book is a complete playlist, so you can learn from start to finish.
So go check out the playlist section. You're going to find something that helps for sure.
And hey, if you like what we're doing, do us a favor and hit that like button.
You're not going to want to miss what's next, so make sure you subscribe for the latest books.
And one last thing. What book should we cover next? Let us know right down in the comments.
All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're cracking open a really fascinating psychological framework. It suggests that human desire isn't just some random lightning strike. It's actually a pretty predictable response to a deep, fundamental need. We're going to explore 18 different profiles that get to the heart of what really makes people tick. And it all kicks off with this single, powerful idea. This right here, this is the whole game. According to the source material, this feeling of not being quite whole is the master key. It's the silent engine driving who we're attracted to, what we chase after, everything. It all builds from this one thought. So that brings us to the big idea here, the theory of lack. The concept is simple, really. We are all, on some level, unconsciously looking for people who have the qualities we feel we're missing in ourselves. It's not about finding your twin. It's about finding that missing puzzle piece that makes you feel complete. And that's what we're calling the missing piece. Think of it as an empty space in someone's life. Maybe it's a sense of adventure they've always pushed down, or a craving for praise they never got, or maybe a longing for the freedom of their youth. And listen, this isn't a flaw, not at all. It's the raw material for a seriously powerful connection. You know, when you really get this, it's kind of like you've developed a new sense. The source calls it the seducer's gaze, which is basically the ability to see past the polite, polished social mask that everybody wears. It's about spotting the gaps, the needs, the quiet desires that are simmering just below the surface. So how do you spot these gaps? Well, the truth is, people are basically broadcasting them 24/7. You just have to know what to look for. It's in those offhand comments, the way they get a little wistful talking about their past, or even in the clothes they choose to wear. These are the tells. These are the clues. Okay, so to make this super clear, we've organized those 18 types into 3 main groups. This way, you can really see this whole theory of lack in action through some pretty clear archetypes. Let's get into the first one. First up, we have the nostalgic. You probably know someone like this. They're people who feel like their best days are already gone, or maybe that the life they always imagined just never quite happened. A perfect example? The disappointed dreamer. So, the disappointed dreamer, this person lives way more in their head than in the real world. Their imagination is huge, fed by all the books they've read and movies they've seen. And because of that, reality just feels, well, kind of gray and disappointing in comparison. They are absolutely starving for a taste of that grand adventure or epic romance. Their missing piece is just a dose of their own fantasy brought to life. Our second group is the constrained. These are the rule followers, the people who are kind of boxed in by routines and what's proper, but secretly they're dying to break free. And the perfect example of this is a really interesting type called the new prude. Now, this one is fascinating because it's all about that inner conflict. The new prude isn't just about being, sexually prudish. They're obsessed with being correct about everything. Tasteful, appropriate, proper. But underneath all that, they are secretly fascinated by the very things they publicly criticize. Their lack is basically a permission slip to be a little bit bad. And for our last group, we have the overlooked. These are people who feel like the world only sees one tiny part of them, while the rest of who they are gets totally ignored. A really powerful and kind of sad example of this is the crushed star. Imagine this, someone who used to be the one, the star athletes, the life of the party, the center of attention. But that was then. Now they've learned to act like they don't need the spotlight anymore. But that desire to shine, it hasn't gone anywhere. It's just hiding. Their missing piece is that incredible feeling of being special again. And the strategy here, as you can see, is just so direct. By turning that spotlight back on them, even for a little bit, you are filling that emptiness and giving them the one thing they secretly crave more than anything. So, I think you're getting the picture, right? This is not a one-size-fits-all deal. Because every person has a different missing piece. The way you connect with them has to be totally unique. Think of it as a strategy of targeted empathy. Different locks need different keys. And this is a perfect illustration. Take the conqueror. They get bored so easily. They need a challenge, an obstacle. If you make things too simple, they're gone. They need the chase. Now look at the beauty. They've been told they're beautiful their entire life. It's boring. What they're dying for is for someone to see their mind, their character. See? Two totally different voids, so you need two totally different strategies.
So we can pretty much boil this down into a simple process. 1. Look past the surface level personality. 2. Figure out what that core longing, that missing piece really is. 3. Offer them what they can't get for themselves. And that last point is critical. The source warns you should never try to connect this way with your own type. Why? Because you'll both have the same hole in your puzzle. You can't complete each other.
Okay, let's zoom out for a second. Because even though the source talks about all of this through the lens of seduction, the idea behind it is so much bigger. It's really about understanding human connection on a fundamental level. And honestly, that's the real takeaway here. This isn't a playbook for manipulation. It's a framework for empathy. It's how you can better understand a coworker, motivate a friend, or get closer to your partner. It's about really seeing what people need and trying to meet them there. And so we end right where we started. This quote really brings it all full circle. The signals are always out there, radiating from everyone we meet. That deep longing to feel complete is a universal human driver. The only real question is, are we paying attention? So, I'll leave you with this to think about. Forget seduction for a moment. Just look at the people in your own life through this new lens. What's their missing piece? What do these profiles show you about what they truly need? To feel seen, to feel understood, and to feel just a little more complete. Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're tackling a really powerful and, let's be honest, often controversial topic. Seduction. We're going to be breaking down a text that looks at it in a totally different way, not as something that just happens, but as a careful, patient, and really strategic art form. All right, let's just dive right in with this quote because it really sets the stage. The source is saying, look, from the very beginning, this isn't about being timid or merciful. It's a game that demands you be bold, that you have this laser-like strategic focus. Forget about your usual hesitations. And honestly, this one idea, it's the foundation for everything else we're about to get into. So why do most attempts to influence someone just fall flat? The source says it boils down to something pretty simple. We're just too wrapped up in ourselves, you know? We hurry things along, we're focused on what we want, and in the process, we just come off as, well, kind of boring and predictable. The seductive approach, it's the polar opposite. It's slow, it's calculated, and the whole point is to build this fantasy world that revolves completely around the other person. And this is so key. Time is basically your secret weapon here. If you rush, you just scream selfish, and boom, the whole illusion you're trying to build just shatters. The idea is that if you go slow, if you're deliberate, it can be almost hypnotic. It lets you kind of slip past their normal defenses and really truly get inside their head. So, to make this happen, the whole process is laid out like a ritual, broken down into 4 distinct phases. And the goal here isn't just to be charming. No, it's way more methodical than that. It's about slowly breaking down a person's resistance, pulling them out of their everyday routine, all through this slow, almost hypnotic process. Okay, so this is basically the roadmap for the entire thing. And it's pretty fascinating when you see it laid out like this. Look at the progression. It all starts in the mind, separating them from their daily worries. Then it moves to the emotions, right? Creating this mix of pleasure and confusion. After that, it goes even deeper, working on the unconscious mind. And only then, after all that, does it end with the physical. It's a very clear, escalating path that goes straight from the mind to the heart to the body. Now, we could honestly do a whole explainer on every single one of these phases. But for today, we're going to zoom in and really focus on what is arguably the most critical part, phase 1, which is all about separation. Why? Because this is the foundation. This is where you plant the first seeds. Get this part wrong, and nothing else matters.
All right, phase 1, separation. So what does that even mean? Think of it like this. The main goal is to create a tiny crack in someone's day-to-day bubble. You want to get them to just look up from their own world and start focusing their attention on you.
And this right here, this is the absolute core of it.
The objective isn't to show off how great you are. Not at all. It's about taking over their mental real estate. It's about literally pushing out all their normal anxieties, their to-do lists, their everyday concerns, and replacing all of that with thoughts about you. So where do you even start? Well, before anything else can happen, the very first step is simple. You just have to get noticed. You've got to somehow pull their attention away from the daily grind and create that first spark of genuine interest. The text lays out a few different opening moves, and it's all about tailoring your approach. For example, if someone seems resistant, you don't go in head-on. You approach indirectly, maybe as a friend, to create this false sense of security. Or if someone seems bored with their life, you send mixed signals to create a little mystery. And for some people, the most powerful move is just to appear desirable, to be seen as someone that lots of other people want. It really all kicks off with picking the right person and the right opening. Okay, so you've got their attention, they're intrigued. Now, the game completely changes. The next move is all about taking that little flicker of curiosity and fanning it into a real flame, turning it into a powerful, genuine desire. And this is the big jump, right? I mean, it's one thing for someone to find you interesting. It's a whole other level for them to actually want you. So how do you do that? How do you bridge that gap and create a real sense of need? Well, the key, according to the source, is a bit counterintuitive. You don't talk about yourself. Instead, you create a sense of emptiness in them. You subtly point out what's missing from their own life, the lack of adventure or passion or romance, and then you position yourself as the answer. Honestly, it's a classic advertising trick, isn't it? Create a problem the customer didn't even know they had, and then sell them the solution. And this is done through a really specific set of moves. First, you stir up a little discontent, make them feel like their current life is missing something. Then, you start using insinuation, dropping these subtle hints about the excitement or pleasure you could offer. Next, you mirror their own values and beliefs to kind of enter their spirit, which builds this incredibly deep connection. And then, for the final move, you create an irresistible temptation that just begs them to take that next step. And what's the result of all this? If it's done right, it's a quiet takeover of their mind. They'll find themselves thinking about you all the time, trying to figure out your mixed signals, daydreaming about the things you've hinted at. And the crazy part is, they often have no idea how deliberately it all happened. So to wrap this all up, the source is really clear that this isn't just about romance. These exact same principles are used all the time in social situations and even in politics, which kind of leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought, doesn't it? If these are the real mechanics of influence, how are they being used on us every single day, shaping what we want, what we believe, and what we desire, maybe without us ever even realizing it? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating strategy. But it's not from war, it's not from business, it's from the art of seduction. And it all boils down to one absolutely crucial first step: choosing the right target. And this, right here, this single idea is the whole key. You see, the source material basically argues that a successful seduction, it doesn't start with the first move. No, it begins way before that. It starts with finding someone who has a void, a space in their life that you can be the one to fill. So, to really get a grip on how this works in practice, we're going to look at a classic case study. We're going back to 18th century France, and we're going to meet a legendary seducer who'd completely lost his touch. So, meet the Vicomte de Valmont. This guy was a total legend. I mean, he was the ruin of countless women, the ingenious seducer of aristocrats' wives. His reputation was absolutely unmatched. But, and it's a big but, he had a serious problem. He was in this state of what you might call mechanical seduction. Basically, his successes were just too easy. Every single seduction felt the same, like he was just following a script. The thrill? Totally gone. And Valmont was just bored. That is, until he got out of Paris and headed to his aunt's quiet country estate. And it was there, in the countryside, that he met her, the Présidente de Tourvel. And let me tell you, on the surface, she seemed like the worst possible target for a guy like him. So you have to picture this. Unlike the witty, sophisticated ladies he was used to in Paris, the president was just different. For starters, she was super religious, completely devoted to her husband who was away, and her fashion sense, well, the source calls it atrocious. So not exactly his usual type, right? But Valmont, he saw something else.
He saw these traits in a totally new light. Her naturalness, the way her whole face would just light up when she was doing something kind, and that passionate depth of feeling she had for her husband, a light bulb went off. He realized that if he could just redirect that devotion towards an affair with him, well, that conquest would be his greatest one ever. Okay, so there's a problem. She knew all about his reputation, and she was keeping her distance. Smart, right? So he knew he needed a way to test her, to see if her conscious defenses could be cracked by an unconscious reaction. And so he sets up this little experiment. He arranges this country walk with the president and his aunt. And he picks a path with a very specific, very strategic little obstacle. He leads them down this path until, surprise, surprise, they come to a small ditch. It's just a little too wide for a lady to cross by herself. This was all about forcing a moment of physical contact. And this is where it gets really clever. This whole thing was a perfectly calculated test. I mean, look at this breakdown. This was not some random act of gallantry. He even does a little rehearsal with his aunt just to make sure the whole thing looks natural when it's the president's turn. So he gets his confirmation, but what did that blush, that fast heartbeat, what did it actually prove? It proved everything. Her body's unconscious reaction completely betrayed her conscious mind's resistance. That blush, that racing heart, that told him the seduction was possible. And just like that, the hunt could begin. All right, so how do we take Valmona's story and turn it into a set of general principles? Let's dive into the anatomy of the so-called victim. Now, I know that's a provocative word, and the source uses it deliberately. We're going to stick with it to stay true to the material, but you can just think of it as the person who becomes the focus of the seducer's attention. So the perfect victim, it's not about superficial stuff, like looks or having the same taste in music. It's about finding someone who has a void you can fill. Someone who's open to your influence. And a lot of the time, that's because they're unhappy or bored or just feeling kind of isolated. So how do you recognize a target like this? Well, the source says you need to look for two sets of signals. First, their unconscious responses to you, the things they can't control, like a blush or mirroring your gestures. But second, and this is just as important, you have to notice their effect on you. Do they make you feel a little uneasy? Do they represent some kind of personal taboo? See, strong feelings on both sides are the fuel for this kind of dynamic. Let's start with the first type, the unhappy. It's pretty simple, really. Happy, totally content people, they're basically inaccessible. As the source puts it, it's always, always easier to fish in troubled waters. Why? Because sadness and misfortune create that void we talked about. They create an opening. And, this unhappiness often goes hand in hand with our next type, the idle. Think about it. People with a lot of time on their hands literally have the mental space for you to move in and occupy. On a flip side, someone who's super busy and preoccupied, they're a terrible target. Their mind is just somewhere else. So they've got all this free time, right? What happens? The mind starts to wander. And that brings us to another perfect quality, a big imagination. A target with a rich fantasy life is going to do a lot of the work for you. They'll, as Kierkegaard put it, envelop your every gesture in poetry, basically imagining way more than is actually there. Now, an active imagination is a huge asset, but you know what can be just as powerful? The exact opposite, deep repression. We're talking about people who outwardly deny themselves pleasure. They are often the most vulnerable to it, which makes for a really dramatic seduction when those defenses finally come crashing down. So ultimately, this whole strategy, this idea of choosing a difficult, challenging target, it all boils down to one central metaphor. And this quote from Stendhal just nails it. For a master like Don Juan, love is basically like hunting. And let's be real, experienced hunters don't go for the prey that's easy to catch, do they? No way. The challenge, that's the entire point. It's all about the big game. You choose a target that presents a real challenge. You don't waste your time with small game that just walks into any old trap. The real pleasure isn't in the prize at the end. It's in the energy, the skill, the pursuit itself. The challenge is what makes the whole thing worthwhile. And that leaves us with one last, pretty provocative thought from Kierkegaard. Most people rush ahead, and in a turn of the hand, everything is over, and they know neither what they have won nor what they have lost. So it makes you wonder, doesn't it? In this strategic game, this thrilling chase, what is really being gained? And maybe more importantly, what's being lost along the way?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into something really powerful, a strategy of influence that our source material calls the indirect approach. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you just laid all your cards on the table, you were being totally upfront, and the other person just pulled away? You think you're being honest, being efficient, but somehow being too direct completely backfires. Why does that happen? Yeah, well, according to our source, coming on too strong, too early, it's like an alarm bell goes off. It triggers this immediate defensive reaction, you know? People instinctively resist feeling pressured or pushed. That wall goes up, and once it's there, good luck trying to get past it. So, okay, what's the alternative? Well, it's all about subtlety. The whole goal is to dial down that mistrust and give yourself some room to work. So instead of stirring up resistance, you create a sense of security. And instead of making someone feel rushed or insecure, you actually spark their curiosity, their imagination, and the big one, you give them the illusion that they are the one in complete control. Okay, so let's really break down this strategy. What is the indirect approach? At its absolute core, it's about creating a false sense of security. It's about coming at things from an angle they just don't see coming, so your target only slowly, gradually becomes aware of you. Yeah, it's all about operating on the periphery, right? Arranging these chance encounters, letting the other person notice you without feeling any kind of pressure at all. The move from, say, friend to something more is so slow, so natural that they honestly don't even realize a shift is happening. You know, the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, he actually captured this idea perfectly with this really powerful metaphor. The goal isn't to chase someone down, it's to spin a web, to create this environment that they willingly, even eagerly, step into. And that image of the spider's web, it's brilliant because it really illustrates the mindset, right? The spider doesn't go chasing after its prey. No. It builds this incredible, almost invisible web, and then it just waits, patiently, for its victims to ensnare themselves. The art is in the construction, not the chase. Okay, so to really see how this plays out in the real world, let's look at a historical case study. Our source presents what it calls a masterpiece of the indirect approach, all the way from 17th century France. And trust me, this is a fascinating story. So, meet our players. On one side, we have Anne-Marie, who was known as La Grande Mademoiselle. I mean, she was Europe's wealthiest heiress, a powerful, guarded idealist who had already turned down countless suitors because she could smell their political motives from a mile away. And on the other side, the Duc de Lizanne, an infamous but incredibly charming court seducer. On paper, this was a completely impossible match. And as you can see from this timeline, this was not some whirlwind romance. Not at all. It was slow. It was deliberate. Lizanne knew that to win over someone this guarded, he had to play the long game. And his very first move was all about building a foundation of unshakable trust. He completely camouflaged his intentions. He never, ever spoke of romance. He wasn't a suitor. He was her most devoted friend and confidant. He studied her, right? He learned what she cared about, poetry, heroism, and he met her on that level. That way, he just bypassed her deep-seated mistrust of what men wanted from her. And here's where it gets really interesting psychologically speaking. Her feelings for him started to grow the most, not when he was there, but when he wasn't. He wasn't pressuring her. Instead, her own imagination was doing all the heavy lifting, filling in that void that he very intentionally created. Now this was the masterstroke. When the king proposed another marriage for her, Lizanne didn't fight it. He just withdrew. He advised her to obey and then stopped visiting, saying their friendship would now be improper. And that forced her to confront her own feelings. All of a sudden, she had this choice to make: duty or desire. By stepping back at that critical moment, he made his presence feel absolutely essential. And the climax? Wow, she rejected the king's brother. And then she handed Lizanne a piece of paper with the name of the man she really wanted to marry written on it. And it just said, "It is you." The brilliance of this whole thing, as our source points out, is that the Grande Mademoiselle was 100% convinced that she was the one making all the moves. She initiated, she confessed, she chose. Lizanne just created the perfect conditions for her to arrive at that conclusion all by herself. So, why is this method so darn powerful? It's more than just being clever. It works because it taps directly into some really deep-seated human psychology.
Let's break down exactly how it gets in our heads. First, it lowers defenses. Friendship just feels safe, right? It totally bypasses that natural tension and mistrust. Second, it sparks the imagination. When you give someone space, you force them to think about you, to wonder about your motives, and they fill in the blanks themselves. And third, and this is key, it creates the illusion of control. The target believes they are the one initiating, making the decisions and moving the relationship forward.
And this is not some new idea, not by a long shot. The Roman poet Ovid, he understood this principle more than 2,000 years ago. He called it the ultimate gambit for winning over even the most resistant people. It's a truly timeless strategy.
Our source has this great phrase for it. It calls the mind the golden gate. Once you gain access to the mind through trust and friendship, that gate is wide open. And from there, any subtle little shift, a lingering look, a sudden absence, can set off a whole new cascade of thoughts and feelings. So, what's the big takeaway here? I mean, this strategy is about so much more than just seduction. Let's look at how this art of subtlety can apply in a much, much broader sense. The core lesson is never reveal your hand too early. Think about it. In pretty much all arenas of life, from politics to social dynamics at the office, seeming to angle for something right away just raises suspicion. Overt ambition can be scary, it can be off-putting, but a subtle approach, that gives you so much more room to maneuver. It lets people get comfortable with your ideas before they even realize what you're really aiming for. Yeah, this quote really gets to the heart of it all. We trust our own conclusions way, way more than what we're told directly. An idea we feel like we discovered on our own, that feels like a revelation. But an idea someone else is pushing on us, that just feels like a sales pitch. And that brings our explainer to a close. It leaves us with a final question to chew on, especially in a world that seems to prize bluntness and radical transparency above all else. In your own life, where might a little more subtlety be the most powerful tool you have?
Welcome to The Explainer. You know, we're often told that to get what we want, we need to be clear, direct, and obvious. But what if that's completely wrong? Today, we're diving into a fascinating idea from our source material, the incredible power of sending mixed signals to create an allure that's almost impossible to resist.
Right? We tend to think clarity is king. But our source material today makes a really powerful case for the opposite. It argues that what truly hooks someone's imagination isn't being an open book, but being a carefully crafted, absolutely captivating mystery. All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start by digging into what this allure of ambiguity really means. Then we're going to look at two absolute masters of this game, Madame Recamier and Oscar Wilde. From there, we'll unpack the psychology, why this stuff works so well, then get into how you can create that mystery yourself. And finally, we'll cover the one big exception, the time when you don't want to use this.
Okay, section 1. So what are we really talking about when we say sending mixed signals? Because it's definitely not about just being confusing for no reason. It's really the art of being hard to figure out. You see, instead of just showing one simple side of yourself, you hint at a fascinating contradiction. You might be tough, but also tender. Spiritual, but also a little bit earthy. This mix creates this enigmatic aura around you that just pulls people in. It makes them want to lean in and figure you out.
So let's make this real. Let's look at our first case study, Madame Recamier. She was considered the most beautiful woman in all of post-revolutionary France, and her influence was absolutely legendary. This is where she was a total genius. Her public image was this pure, innocent, almost spiritual angel. But just when you thought you had her figured out, she'd let a little something slip. A roguish look, a slightly flirtatious comment, or she'd suddenly dance with this wild energy. It was that stark contrast, that angelic devil, that drove men absolutely crazy. And the effect was just intoxicating. I mean, you had powerful men like Prince August of Prussia becoming completely obsessed. He offered her marriage, he promised to change his religion for her, anything to solve the puzzle that she was. But she always kept them at arm's length, just letting their own imaginations do all the work for her.
Now for someone totally different who used the exact same playbook, the one and only Oscar Wilde. He basically built his entire public identity on this idea of paradox.
Wilde's entire public image was a deliberate clash of qualities. On one hand, you had this effeminate poet, with the velvet suits and the long flowing hair. But anyone who tried to mess with him or mock him got a huge shock. They found this incredibly tough, dignified guy who could outdrink hardened miners and then just win them over with his natural charm.
I mean, this quote from a cowboy says it all, doesn't it? People showed up expecting to laugh at some fragile dandy, and they left completely captivated by a man who defied every single one of their expectations. It was this puzzle that made him an absolute sensation. Everyone was trying to figure out how these two opposite sides could exist in one person.
And get this, he was so aware of the effect he had that he once improvised this little fable to explain it. He compared himself to a magnet and everyone else to steel filings. The filings think they're moving on their own, by their own choice, but really, they're just being pulled in by this invisible, irresistible force.
Okay, so we've seen that it works. But the big question is, why? Why are we so hooked by people who are hard to figure out? What's going on in our brains?
Well, the source points to a few classic, powerful pairings that just seem to work on us. Think about it. Errol Flynn had that boyish sweetness, but with a hint of danger. Marilyn Monroe had that powerful sexuality mixed with this incredible innocence. These paradoxes suggest a depth, a complexity that we just can't help but be fascinated by.
And here's the real heart of it. We live in a world that demands logic, reason, and that everything makes sense. But deep down, our brains are kind of tired of that. So anything that breaks the pattern, anything that can't be easily put in a box, feels like a breath of fresh air. Ambiguity gives our imaginations something to play with, a puzzle to solve, and we secretly love that. Okay, so how do you actually do this? This is where it gets really interesting, because the source doesn't just talk theory, it gives us a practical guide. This is a real technique. It's a 3-step process. First, you establish a very clear surface quality, like Madame Recamier's innocence or Wilde's dandyism. Then, and this is the key, you subtly hint at the opposite. It has to be a hint, not a billboard. Finally, the third step is to pull back a bit, maintain some distance. That space allows people's own imaginations to do the heavy lifting, to fill in all the blanks with their own fantasies about who you are. And just so we're clear, this isn't just about romance. Not at all. This is a huge principle for anyone who needs to hold an audience's attention. Think about John F. Kennedy. He was a master at this. He had that aristocratic Harvard background, but also this genuine common touch. He was an intellectual who loved pop culture. That complexity made him magnetic to an entire nation. But, no strategy is a silver bullet, and this one has a huge exception. A time when trying to create all this mystery can totally, completely backfire. So the source asks a really important question here. Does this whole mystery thing always work? I mean, what about people who just don't like puzzles? Not everyone's into nuance. And the answer is a hard no. For some people, ambiguity is just annoying. They don't have the patience for it. They respond way better to something direct, overwhelming, and simple, a big, spectacular display of beauty or power. You can see the difference right here. Madame Recamier's whole complex vibe, it worked perfectly on her crowd of sophisticated artists and intellectuals. But for a different kind of audience, you have someone like Casanova, with his dazzling clothes and over-the-top jewels. That simple spectacle was way more effective. It really all comes down to knowing who you're dealing with. Ultimately, the power we've been talking about today is captured perfectly in this one symbol, the theater curtain. Yeah, the curtain itself can be beautiful and hypnotic, but the real magic, the real pull, is the mystery of what you think is happening just behind it. It's the potential, the secret, the story that's about to unfold. And that leaves us with one last provocative thought. In a world that's always pushing us to be simple and easy to understand, what contradictions and complexities do we choose to show? And which ones do we keep hidden? What's the story hiding behind your curtain? Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to dig into a really powerful and often subconscious dynamic in human psychology. Why is it that we so often want what other people want? It's a force that shapes pretty much everything, from our romantic lives to our political choices. So to get our heads around this, let's dive into a fascinating and pretty traumatic story from history that just perfectly illustrates this whole thing. It's a real tale of philosophy, passion, and some intense rivalry. Okay, picture this. We're in the intellectual salons of 19th century Europe, and our story involves three brilliant, very intense minds whose lives are about to get tangled up in this wild philosophical triangle. So our philosopher Paul Rée was just completely smitten by Salome's sharp mind and, well, her flirtatious eyes. They'd spend days walking through Rome, just lost in conversation.
But right as he was falling for her, Salome drops a surprising proposition that was about to change everything. She wanted to meet his friend, the famous philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Ray, wanting to please her and maybe boost his own standing, he agreed. He probably thought bringing in more intellectual firepower would make him look even better. Turns out that was a huge mistake.
And yeah, this is exactly where a simple intellectual connection just escalates into this fierce, all-consuming rivalry. Because as soon as Nietzsche showed up, the entire dynamic just shifted.
Rio was totally overcome with what he later called shivers of jealousy. The intellectual trio he had imagined was gone. Now he and Nietzsche were rivals. And you know what happened? Salome's value in the eyes of both men just skyrocketed as they fought for her affection. A battle of egos that would seriously haunt them for years.
So, what's the big deal with this story? Well, it's not just about unrequited love. It perfectly demonstrates a core concept of human desire. Let's unpack the universal principle that was really at play here. This right here is the key idea. Our desire is often imitated. It's not a straight line between us and the thing we want. Instead, it forms a triangle. You've got the subject, that's us, the object of desire, in this case Salome, and then you've got a rival, the other person who also wants them.
So how does this actually work? Well, it usually unfolds in 3 steps. It starts with just some simple interest. But then, when you introduce a third party, the rival, that interest gets totally transformed. It becomes this intense, competitive desire. The object's value doesn't just go up. It suddenly feels essential to win. And this quote from the philosopher René Girard just nails the point. Our desires are often just a reflection of other people's desires. It taps directly into our vanity, our ego, and our deep-seated competitive nature. We want to prove that we're more worthy than the rival. But this principle, it isn't just about creating a single head-to-head rivalry. No, it can be scaled up to create this general sense of being highly sought after, an almost magnetic quality. The goal here is basically to manufacture an aura of desirability. You create the perception that you are a prize worth competing for. This can be done with what's called the harem effect, surrounding yourself with admirers, or by leveraging a reputation, or even just by making yourself seem less available. Here is a perfect example. Pauline Bonaparte would never attend a party or go for a walk with just one man. No, she was always accompanied by 2 or 3. The sight of this little harem of admirers immediately stirred up the competitive instincts of any new suitor. They didn't just want her. They wanted to be the one to win her away from the crowd. So the crucial point is this. Desirability isn't really this innate, fixed quality. More often than not, it's a social illusion that we construct and project. We see something as valuable because we see other people valuing it first. Okay, so there's another really powerful variation on this whole strategy. It's about enhancing your appeal not by showing who wants you, but by contrasting yourself with all the people around you. Take Nell Gwyn. She became the main mistress of King Charles II partly because her natural wit and humor just shone so brightly against the, frankly, boring formality of the royal court. Her desirability was amped up by the contrast. She was this rare and refreshing prize. And this dynamic plays out in politics all the time. In the 1980 presidential race, Ronald Reagan's whole persona of single-minded decisiveness seemed way more desirable to a lot of voters when you contrasted it with the perception of Jimmy Carter's style at the time. It was the contrast itself that made his appeal so much stronger. All right, let's bring this all together. What is the ultimate takeaway from this powerful psychological phenomenon? What does it all mean? At the end of the day, we are social creatures, and we're deeply influenced by the tastes and desires of the people around us. This plays out everywhere. It's why a restaurant with a huge line out front seems more appealing, why a product goes viral after a few influencers post about it, and why we suddenly want the job our coworker is also trying to get. Desirability is totally contagious. And this metaphor of the trophy, it just captures the essence of it all perfectly. Think about it. A trophy has no real value on its own. It's just a piece of metal, right? Its value comes entirely from how many people are fighting for it. Winning it isn't just about your victory. It's about everyone else's defeat. And that right there is the core of competitive desire. And that leaves us with a pretty provocative question to chew on. If so much of what we chase in life is just a reflection of the crowd, how do we even begin to figure out what we genuinely want for ourselves? It's a crucial question to consider.
Thanks for watching.